Nathan Hale set his ID badge down on the conference table so quietly that everyone in the room heard it anyway. His hands were steady. His voice wasn't loud. But what he said next made the bank's CEO go pale in front of 11 employees. "I'd like to withdraw everything I have from this bank. Approximately $86 million. 3 hours earlier, they had fired him over $9. They thought he was nobody, a tired single father in a second-hand coat. What they didn't know was about to end. Careers expose a decade of hidden corruption, and it started with a number so small, nobody thought to check it twice. Before we go further, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now hit subscribe because this one is far from over. Let's begin. Approximately $86 million. The words landed in the conference room like a dropped glass, that half-second of silence right before everyone realizes something has shattered. Sophia Kensington, CEO of Crestwell National Bank, felt her throat tighten. Richard Voss, the bank's head of legal, stopped writing mid-sentence. Diane Whitmore, HR director, looked down at the termination folder in her hands as if it had suddenly caught fire. Nobody said anything for 11 full seconds. 6 hours earlier, none of them could have imagined this moment was coming. Nathan Hale woke up at 5:40 that morning, same as every morning, to the sound of his daughter's alarm going off 2 rooms away and her groggy voice muttering, 5 more minutes, to no one in particular. He smiled at the ceiling before he even opened his eyes. Some mornings that smile was the only thing that got him out of bed. "Lily, school," he called out, pulling on the same gray sweater he'd worn twice that week already. I know," she groaned back. He made 2 coffees, one for himself. One poured into a travel mug that said, "World's Okayest Dad." A gift from Lily. 2 Christmases ago that he refused to replace, even though the paint had started chipping. He packed her lunch. He checked her math homework sitting on the counter, circled one wrong answer in pencil so lightly she wouldn't feel embarrassed, and left it there for her to find. "You didn't have to do that," Lily said when she walked in and saw the circle. "Didn't have to. Wanted to," Nathan said. Question 14. Look at it again before the bus. She rolled her eyes, but she smiled doing it. That was enough for him. "Dad." "Yeah." "You okay? You've been weird lately. Quiet weird." Nathan paused with his hand on the door. He hadn't told her about the calls from the bank the past 2 weeks, the vague comments from his manager, the sudden requests for old documents, the feeling that something was being built against him that he couldn't yet see the shape of. "Just tired," he said. "Work stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." "You always say that." "Because it's always true," he said, and kissed the top of her head. "Go, bus." She left. He stood in the kitchen a moment longer than he needed to, looking at the wrong answer homework sheet, at the chipped travel mug, at the quiet, ordinary life he had built around a secret he had never once used to make things easier. Nathan Hale had inherited a family trust worth $86 million when he was 26 years old. He had never touched more than what he needed to live. Modestly raise his daughter and keep his late wife's memory intact in a house that still had her handwriting on a recipe card taped inside the pantry door. Money to Nathan was not something you flaunted. It was something you protected quietly, patiently, the same way he protected his daughter. He drove his 12-year-old sedan to Crestwell National Bank, parked in the same spot he always parked in, and walked in through the employee entrance at 8:02 a.m. He had no idea it would be the last time he did. By 9:15, Nathan was at his desk running a routine reconciliation on the Meridian account cluster when his phone buzzed. It was Greg Sanders, his branch manager. "Nathan, my office. Now." Not "when you get a second." Not "come by whenever." Now. Nathan saved his work and walked down the hallway past cubicles where a few coworkers glanced up and then quickly looked back at their screens, the particular kind of not looking that told him something was already wrong before he even opened the door. Inside Greg's office sat Diane Whitmore from HR, a man Nathan didn't recognize holding a leather folder, and Greg himself standing instead of sitting arms crossed. "Close the door," Greg said. Nathan did. "Nathan, we need to talk about a $9 discrepancy flagged in the Meridian reconciliation you processed last week." Nathan blinked. $9. Yes. You called me in here, pulled me off my desk for $9. It's not about the amount, Diane said carefully. It's about what it represents. A discrepancy is a discrepancy. Then let's look at it, Nathan said, already reaching for the folder. I can walk you through the entire reconciliation right now, line by line. It'll take 10 minutes. The man with the leather folder, Nathan would later learn his name, was Marcus Feld, an outside auditor brought in ahead of the quarterly review, spoke for the first time. That won't be necessary. It's very necessary, Nathan said. And for the first time that morning, his calm voice had an edge in it. If there's an error, I want to find it. If it's my error, I'll own it. But I'm not going to sit here and be accused of something without seeing the numbers. Nathan, Greg said, and something in the way he said it made Nathan's stomach drop. This isn't a conversation about reviewing numbers. Diane opened the folder. Effective immediately, your employment with Crestwell National Bank is terminated. The room went quiet in a different way than before, not tense, but final, like a door closing somewhere deep in the building. On what grounds? Nathan said slowly. Exactly. Financial discrepancy, and a pattern of concern raised ahead of the audit, Diane said, reading almost verbatim from a paper in front of her. The bank has to protect its integrity, especially right now. A pattern, Nathan repeated. Show me the pattern. Nobody answered. Show me one other flagged discrepancy with my name on it. One. In 11 years. Still nothing. Nathan looked around the room at Greg, who wouldn't meet his eyes at Diane, who kept her eyes fixed on the folder, like it might save her from having to look at him directly at Marcus Feld, who seemed almost bored like this was simply a box being checked before lunch. You're firing a man with 11 years of clean record over $9, 3 weeks before an audit without letting him see the actual numbers, Nathan said. It wasn't a question anymore. He was just saying it out loud so it would exist somewhere spoken on the record, even if only in that room. That's not an investigation. That's a decision you already made, and you needed a reason to write down. Nathan, please, Greg said. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I'm not making it anything, Nathan said. I'm describing it. Diane slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. We need your badge and your signature acknowledging termination. Nathan didn't move for a long moment. He thought about Lily's math homework circled in pencil. He thought about the travel mug with the chipped paint. He thought about 11 years of showing up at 8:02 a.m., of never once being late, of covering shifts for coworkers with sick kids, of the promotion he'd turned down twice, because it would have meant less time at home after his wife passed. He thought about how easily all of that had just been erased by a number smaller than a sandwich combo. He signed the paper. Not because he agreed with it, but because he understood in that instant that arguing further in this room would accomplish nothing. The decision had already been made before he walked in. He unclipped his badge and set it on the table. There's one more thing, Nathan said, standing. Nathan, we really need to wrap this up, Diane said. This will only take a moment. His voice was still calm, unnervingly calm, the kind of calm that made Greg shift his weight uncomfortably. Since I'm no longer an employee, I'd like to speak to someone about my accounts, all of them. Your accounts? Greg asked. I bank here, personally, have for years. Nathan looked at each of them in turn. I'd like to close everything out, today if possible. Diane gave a tight professional smile, the kind reserved for a formality she assumed would take 15 minutes and involve a checking account with a few $1,000s in it. Of course, I can have someone from client services meet you downstairs. That won't be necessary, Nathan said. Given the total, I think this needs to go through someone a bit more senior than client services. The total? Greg asked. Approximately $86 million, Nathan said. Across the family trust, the investment accounts, and the holdings my grandfather set up before I was born. I'd like it processed by end of day. For a moment, nobody in the room breathed. "I'm sorry, did you say 86 million?" Marcus Feld asked, the boredom gone completely from his voice. "I did." "That's Nathan that can't be right," Greg said, half laughing, the kind of laugh people do when they're hoping the ground will stop tilting if they just laugh hard enough. You've worked here 11 years as an analyst." "I have," Nathan said. "None of that has ever had anything to do with the money. I never touched it beyond what my daughter and I needed to live. I didn't think it was anyone's business. I still don't, honestly. But since you've just fired me over $9, I think it's fair that I take my 86 million somewhere else." Diane's hand had gone still on the folder. "Nathan, let's slow down for a moment. Perhaps we can revisit You had your chance to slow down 15 minutes ago," Nathan said quietly. "You chose not to." He picked his coat up off the back of the chair. "I'll be at the front desk. I assume someone in this building has the authority to process a withdrawal of that size. If not, I'm sure my attorney can find someone who does." He walked out of Greg's office without raising his voice, without slamming the door, without a single dramatic gesture, and that somehow made it worse for everyone left inside the room. A man who had every reason to shout had simply told them the truth and left. Word moves fast inside a bank. By the time Nathan reached the lobby, someone had already made a phone call, and that phone call had already reached the 14th floor. Sophia Kensington had been CEO of Crestwell National for 6 years. She had built her reputation on precision cutting costs, streamlining departments, presenting flawless numbers to the board every quarter. She had approved Nathan's termination that morning in a 2-minute phone call with Diane without reading a single line of his file because the audit was 3 weeks away, and a clean narrative mattered more to her in that moment than a clean investigation. She had not expected the man she fired over lunch money to be worth more than half her bank's annual customer deposits combined. "Say that again," Sophia said into the phone, standing so fast her chair rolled back and hit the window behind her desk. "He wants to withdraw everything," Diane said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. 86 million. He says he'll wait at the front desk." "That is not possible. Nobody carrying $86 million personally reconciles a Meridian account for a living." "I know how it sounds, Sophia, but he wasn't bluffing. You didn't see his face." Sophia closed her eyes for a second. She thought about the audit. She thought about the board meeting in 3 weeks. She thought about the quiet, easy narrative she had approved that morning. Employee terminated for cause matter resolved, and how quickly it had turned into something that could unravel everything else she'd spent 6 years building. "I'll come down myself," she said. Nathan was sitting in the lobby, coat folded over his knee, when Sophia Kensington walked toward him in heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. A sound designed, whether she meant it to be or not, to announce authority before she'd said a single word. "Mr. Hale," she said, extending a hand he did not take. "I understand there's been some confusion this morning." "There's been no confusion," Nathan said. "You fired me for $9 without evidence, and now I'd like to close my accounts. Both of those things are very clear." Sophia's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression smooth. "I'd like to offer you a private room where we can discuss this more comfortably." "I'm comfortable here," Nathan said, "but I appreciate the offer." A small crowd of employees had started gathering near the far end of the lobby, pretending to check mail slots, pretending to refill the coffee station, all of them straining to hear. "Mr. Hale, I think there may have been an oversight this morning regarding your termination," Sophia said, lowering her voice. "If you'd be willing to sit down and discuss—" "An oversight," Nathan repeated. "That's an interesting word for it. Perhaps error in judgment is more accurate." "That's closer," Nathan said. "Though I'd add error in judgment made without ever once asking me a single real question." Nobody in that room looked at the actual reconciliation. Nobody asked what happened. Diane read from a script. "Greg wouldn't look at me." "And you approved it over the phone in less time than it takes to order coffee, didn't you?" Sophia didn't answer, and that silence answered for her. "I'm not interested in getting my job back," Nathan continued. I don't think I'd trust this place with my daughter's school lunch money, let alone 11 more years of my life. What I am interested in is understanding why a man with a clean 11-year record got thrown away over $9 3 weeks before an audit. That timing bothers me, Ms. Kensington. It bothers me a great deal. Something flickered behind Sophia's composed expression. Not guilt exactly. Not yet, but the first thin crack of doubt. Are you suggesting there's something improper about the audit? I'm not suggesting anything, Nathan said, standing and buttoning his coat. I'm telling you, I intend to find out. And in the meantime, I'd like my money processed today. All of it. I trust you can find someone senior enough to handle that, since apparently nobody senior enough was available to handle a simple $9 question this morning. He walked toward the doors. The small crowd near the coffee station parted, without meaning to the way people do around something they don't fully understand yet, but instinctively recognize as important. Sophia stood alone in the middle of her own lobby, hands cold, watching the man she had fired that morning walk out through the front doors like he had all the time in the world, because as it turned out, he did. What none of them realized yet, not Sophia, not Diane, not Greg, not the auditor with the leather folder, was that the $9 discrepancy they had used to justify Nathan's termination wasn't a mistake at all. It was a thread. And Nathan Hale had just decided to pull it. He didn't go home right away. He sat in his car in the parking garage for almost 10 minutes, both hands on the wheel engine off, just breathing. 11 years condensed into a single morning. He thought about calling someone, his sister maybe, or Marcus Pierce, the trust attorney, who had managed his grandfather's estate since before Nathan could drive. Instead, he picked up his phone and called the one person whose voice he actually needed to hear. "Hey, Dad, aren't you supposed to be at work?" Lily answered, half whispering, clearly still in class. "I got let go this morning," Nathan said. There was no point softening it. He had never lied to her about anything that mattered, and he wasn't going to start now. A pause. "Wait, what? Why?" "They said I was responsible for a $9 mistake in an account. I wasn't. But they didn't want to hear that." "That's insane. 11 years, Dad. 11 years. Are you okay?" Nathan looked out the windshield at the gray concrete wall of the parking garage. "I will be. I want you to know something, though, and I need you to just listen for a second before you say anything." "Okay. You know how I've always told you money isn't the most important thing. That your grandfather left our family something, but I never wanted it to change how we lived." "Yeah. I told the bank today exactly how much that something is, and I asked them to give it all back to me." Silence on the other end long enough that Nathan thought the call had dropped. "Lily, how much, Dad?" $86 million. She didn't scream. She didn't laugh. Her voice when it came back was quieter than he expected, almost careful, like she was handling something fragile. "You've never told anyone that. Not even me. Not really." "I know." "Why today?" Nathan closed his eyes. "Because today, for the first time in 11 years, somebody decided my word wasn't worth listening to. And I realized I was tired of being small, just so other people could feel comfortable." There was a long breath on the other end of the line. "Dad, I don't care about the money. I never have. You know that, right?" "I know," Nathan said, and something in his chest loosened for the first time all day. "That's exactly why I'm telling you first." "So what happens now?" "Now," Nathan said, starting the engine. "I find out why they really fired me." By the time Nathan reached his lawyer's office across town, the story had already started moving through the bank, in the way stories do not through official channels, but through the side doors, the break rooms, the group chats employees swore they'd never use for gossip, and then absolutely did. Maria Chen, a loan officer who had sat 2 cubicles down from Nathan for 6 years, cornered Diane near the elevator bank before noon. "Tell me it isn't true," Maria said. "I can't discuss personnel matters," Diane said stiffly, though her face had lost its usual composure. "Diane, I watched you walk him out this morning like he was a security risk. Now half the building is saying he just asked to pull $86 million out of this bank." Either that's a rumor, or you people fired the wrong person over lunch money." Diane didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence told Maria everything. "You knew him," Maria pressed. "Everyone did. He covered my shifts when my son was in the hospital. He never once raised his voice in 6 years. And you let Feld walk in with some rushed report and use him as a sacrifice before the audit." "That's not what happened," Diane said, but her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Then what did happen?" Diane looked past Maria down the hallway toward Sophia's office on the 14th floor and said nothing at all. Upstairs, Sophia Kensington sat behind her desk with the door closed, staring at a single line item on her monitor. Meridian Cluster. Reconciliation Flag. $9. Analyst N. Hale. $9. She had approved a man's termination, a man's entire career, a man's reputation off of $9 and a name on a spreadsheet without once asking who Marcus Feld actually reported to, or why an outside auditor had been the one to flag it 3 weeks before a scheduled review, instead of the internal compliance team that normally handled reconciliations. She picked up her phone and called Feld directly. "Marcus, I need the full audit trail on the Meridian flag, not the summary. Everything." "That's still being compiled," Feld said smoothly. "I can have it to you by end of week." "I want it today," Sophia said. "Sophia, with respect, the board doesn't need a $9 item slowing down a multi-million-dollar audit process. It was handled. The employee's gone." Sophia's grip tightened on the phone. "The employee you had handled just informed me he holds $86 million in personal assets at this bank, Marcus. He is not gone. He is, as of about 40 minutes ago, the single most dangerous person walking around outside this building with an opinion about how we operate." There was a pause on the line, a pause that lasted just a fraction too long to be nothing. "I'll get you the full trail today," Feld said finally, his voice flatter than before. Sophia hung up without saying goodbye. She sat there a long moment replaying the morning meeting in her head, the folder Diane had prepared in advance, the termination letter that had somehow already been printed before Nathan even walked into Greg's office, the fact that nobody, not one person in that room, had actually looked at the reconciliation line by line the way Nathan had asked them to. She had trusted the paperwork. She hadn't trusted the man. For the first time since becoming CEO, Sophia Kensington felt the particular kind of fear that comes not from an external threat, but from the growing suspicion that the danger had been sitting inside her own building the entire time, and that she had just handed it a reason to start looking. That evening, Nathan sat at his kitchen table with Lily's math homework pushed to one side and a legal pad in front of him, instead writing down everything he remembered from the meeting. The exact wording Diane had used, the printed termination letter that already existed before the investigation supposedly happened, the way Greg wouldn't meet his eyes the name Marcus Feld, that none of them had bothered to explain. Lily came down in her pajamas around 9, sat across from him, and didn't say anything for a while. She just watched him write. "You're doing the thing," she finally said. "What thing?" "The thing where you get really quiet and really focused, and I know you're not going to stop until you understand exactly what happened." She almost smiled. "You did it after Mom died too. Read every single piece of paperwork twice." Nathan set the pen down. "I don't like not understanding things, Lils, especially not when they involve people lying to my face and calling it policy." "So what are you going to do? Actually pull all the money out?" "I already started the process," Nathan said. "But that's not really the point anymore." "Then what is?" Nathan looked at his daughter, 16 years old, steady in a way he was quietly proud of, watching him with the same clear-eyed patience her mother used to have. "They didn't fire me over $9, Lily," he said slowly. $9 isn't a reason. It's a distraction. Somebody used my name to cover something bigger, and they picked me because they assumed nobody would ever look twice at the quiet guy in the gray sweater who drives an old car and never causes trouble. So they're going to regret picking you. They're going to regret not asking a single real question, Nathan said. That's the part that actually matters. Lily reached across the table and turned his legal pad slightly toward herself, scanning the notes. What do you need? Just time, Nathan said. And maybe eventually help from people inside that building who are as tired of staying quiet as I am. Find the truth, Lily said quietly, echoing something he'd told her 100 times growing up, handing the words back to him now like a promise. That's what you always tell me to do, when things aren't fair. Find the truth, not the revenge. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, something in his chest tightening, in the good way this time. The way that reminds a person exactly why they keep going. Yeah, he said quietly. That's exactly what I'm going to do. He picked the pen back up, pulled the legal pad toward himself, and kept writing long after Lily had gone back up to bed, because somewhere inside Crestwell National Bank, buried under a $9 excuse and a rushed signature on a termination letter, there was a much bigger number waiting to be found. And Nathan Hale, the man they had decided was worth nothing at all, intended to find every last cent of it. The legal pad was still open on the kitchen table when Nathan called Marcus Pierce the next morning, his coffee going cold beside 3 pages of notes he'd filled the night before. Marcus had handled the trust since Nathan's grandfather died, a careful man who rarely raised his voice, but even he sounded rattled once Nathan explained what had happened. You told them the number, Marcus said. It wasn't quite a question. I did. Nathan, a withdrawal that size doesn't just move quietly. Any transfer over 10 million triggers automatic reporting. Regulators get pinged, the board gets pinged. You just lit a signal flare over that entire bank and every executive in the building is going to see it. Good, Nathan said. I want them to see it. There's a difference between wanting attention and being ready for what it brings, Marcus said. If you actually pull the trust today, you tip your hand. Whoever set you up loses their scapegoat and panics, sure, but they also get warned. They'll have time to shred what they don't want found. Nathan sat back, jaw tight. He hadn't thought about it that way. He'd been so focused on the moment of walking out with his dignity intact that he hadn't considered the withdrawal itself might hand the real culprits exactly what they needed: time. So what do I do? Nathan said. Just let them keep my money like nothing happened. No, Marcus said. You let them think you're still deciding. You freeze the process at intake, tell them you're weighing your options, and you use the fact that they're terrified right now. A scared bank moves paperwork faster than a calm one. People start making mistakes when they think the walls are closing in. Nathan looked down at his notes. Feld's name circled twice, Greg's inability to meet his eyes, the termination letter that had existed before anyone claimed to investigate anything. All right, he said quietly. We wait, but not for long. 14 floors above the lobby where Nathan had once folded his coat over his knee, Sophia Kensington was already living inside the fear Marcus had just described. She'd spent the entire night pulling old audit summaries, cross-referencing dates, looking for anything that explained why an outside auditor had flagged a $9 discrepancy 3 weeks before a scheduled review, instead of letting internal compliance handle it the way policy required. By 7 in the morning, she had Marcus Feld back in her office, and this time she didn't offer him coffee. I want to know who requested this audit, Sophia said, sliding a printed log across her desk. Not the department, the name. Feld's eyes flicked to the paper and back up too quickly. It came through the standard pre-audit review channel. There is no standard channel that authorizes an outside contractor to flag a single employee's account 3 weeks ahead of schedule, Sophia said. I checked, so I'll ask you again. Whose name is on the request that brought you into this building? Feld shifted in his chair. Sophia, I really think... I looked at the system timestamp on the Meridian flag, Sophia said, cutting him off, her voice flat and dangerous in a way her staff rarely heard. It wasn't generated automatically. It was entered manually at 6:52 in the morning before the branch even opened. Someone typed that flag in by hand and backdated the metadata to make it look routine. I want to know whose credentials did that. The silence stretched long enough that Feld's composure finally cracked at the edges. The login belonged to a service account, he said carefully. Shared. I can't confirm who was physically at the keyboard. Whose service account, Marcus? He hesitated one more second too long. It's tied to Victor Lang's office. Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Victor Lang, Chief Financial Officer. The man who had personally walked her through Crestwell's projected quarterly numbers 2 weeks earlier. Numbers that made the board practically glow with satisfaction. Numbers that were about to be presented at the very audit. This $9 distraction had been planted 3 weeks ahead of. "Get out of my office," Sophia said quietly, "and don't discuss this conversation with anyone. Not Lang, not legal, no one." Feld didn't argue. He gathered his folder and left without another word, and the moment the door clicked shut, Sophia sat completely still, staring at the name on the page, understanding for the first time that the fire she thought she'd contained by firing one quiet analyst was not a fire at all. It was smoke rising from something much larger still burning somewhere beneath the floor she was standing on. Across town, in a diner, 2 blocks from a branch, Nathan hadn't set foot in for years. Maria Chen slid into the booth across from him with a manila folder pressed flat against her chest, like she was afraid someone might see the outline of it through her coat. "You look like you haven't slept," Nathan said. "I haven't," Maria said. "Not since yesterday, when half the building started whispering that Nathan Hale, the guy who covers everyone's shifts and never says a bad word about anybody, turned out to be worth $86 million and got walked out over lunch money." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You could have told somebody, Nathan." "Would it have mattered?" Maria considered that. "No," she admitted. "Honestly, it would have just made people treat you weird. That's what I thought." Nathan nodded at the folder. "What's that?" Maria slid it across the table, but kept her hand on top of it for a moment, like she needed a second to decide she was really doing this. "Complaints," she said. "Customer complaints. Small dollar amounts mostly. $2 here, $5 there, a maintenance fee that shows up on accounts that shouldn't have one. I started noticing the pattern about a year ago, because they all cluster on the same account type, low balance checking, the kind held mostly by people who can't afford to fight a $2 charge or don't notice it's even there." Nathan opened the folder. Pages of complaint tickets, most marked resolved with almost identical language. Fee reversed as customer courtesy. No further action required. "They reverse it when someone complains," Nathan said slowly, "but they never stop charging it in the first place." "Exactly," Maria said. "It's not a glitch. A glitch doesn't have this many people quietly making sure it stays hidden every single time somebody notices." She leaned in, voice dropping. "Nathan, I think this goes higher than Greg. I think it goes way higher than Greg." Nathan felt his pulse pick up that particular tightening that came with realizing a suspicion had just become something closer to fact. "How high?" he asked. Maria hesitated. "I don't know for sure, but 3 months ago I flagged a cluster of these to compliance, and 2 weeks later the compliance officer who took my report got quietly reassigned to a regional office in another state. Nobody talks about it. Nobody asks why." "What was her name?" "Elaine Marsh." Nathan wrote it down beneath Feld's circled name, beneath Greg's, beneath a growing list that was starting to look less like a $9 mistake and more like a structure. Back at Crestwell, Richard Voss found Sophia standing at her window when he walked in without knocking, which he never did, and that alone told her something had shifted. "I heard you pulled Feld in this morning," Voss said. "Word travels fast. It does when you're asking questions that make people nervous." Voss closed the door behind him. "Sophia, I'm going to say this once as your counsel and as someone who's worked beside you for 6 years. Whatever you think you're chasing right now, I'd strongly advise you stop." Sophia turned to face him fully. "Why?" "Because you don't actually want to find what's under that rock," Voss said. "Trust me." "That's not an answer, Richard. That's a warning. Take it as whichever one keeps you safest," Voss said, and left before she could respond. The door clicking shut with a kind of finality that made Sophia's hands go cold for the second time that day. That evening, Nathan's phone rang from a blocked number while he was helping Lily clear the dinner table. He almost let it go to voicemail. Something made him answer. Mr. Hale, a low, unfamiliar voice said. You should think very carefully about how far you push this. Nathan's stomach dropped. Who is this? You have a daughter? The voice continued, ignoring the question entirely. 16, junior year. Takes the 7:40 bus on Maple. It would be a shame if this situation caused any unnecessary disruption to her life. The line went dead before Nathan could say another word. He stood frozen in the kitchen phone still pressed to his ear, the dial tone humming against his skull, and when Lily called out from the other room, asking who was on the phone, his voice came out steadier than he felt. Wrong number, he said. But his hands were shaking when he set the phone down, and for the first time since the meeting in Greg's office, Nathan understood that this was no longer just about a lie told over $9. Someone with real power was watching him, and they knew exactly where his daughter caught the bus. He didn't sleep that night either. By morning, he had a decision to make, and he made it sitting across from Lily at the same table where she'd handed his own words back to him 2 nights before. Somebody called me last night, he said quietly. They know about you, your school, your bus stop. Lily went very still. Dad. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that isn't terrifying, Nathan said. But I need you to hear me. I'm not stopping. Whatever they're hiding, it's bigger than $9, and it's hurting people who don't have $86 million to fall back on when the bank decides to lie about them. So what, we just live scared now? No, Nathan said. We live careful. I'm hiring someone to keep an eye on the house for a while. I'm changing your route to school for a few weeks. And I need you to tell me immediately if anything feels wrong, anyone follows you, anyone asks questions about me. Lily's jaw tightened, but she nodded, and underneath the fear in her eyes, Nathan saw something else too. The same stubborn resolve he recognized from every mirror he'd ever looked into. Find the truth, she said again, quieter this time, like she was reminding herself as much as him. Just be careful doing it. I will, Nathan said, and meant it even though some part of him already suspected careful might not be enough. 3 days later, an email arrived in an inbox Nathan had created specifically for this, an address with no name attached to it, set up the same night Marcus Pierce told him to slow the withdrawal down. The subject line read only Elaine Marsh. We need to talk. He drove 2 hours outside the city to meet her, a small coffee shop off the highway where nobody from Crestwell would recognize either of them. Elaine was younger than he expected, maybe 35, with the kind of exhausted alertness of someone who'd been looking over her shoulder for months. Maria told you my name? She said, not quite a question. She did. I got reassigned to a branch 200 miles from my kids' school 3 months ago, Elaine said. Officially, it was a promotion. Unofficially, I flagged a pattern I wasn't supposed to see, and 48 hours later my entire life got rearranged. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, like it was the only warm thing in the room. You want to know what I found? Yes. It's not just fees, Elaine said. The fees are real, and they're wrong, and they've probably taken millions from people who could least afford it. But that's not the part that got me moved. The part that got me moved was the quarterly reports. Nathan leaned forward. What about them? For the last 3 fiscal years, the numbers presented to the board don't match the internal ledgers I had access to before I got pulled off the account, Elaine said. Not by a little. By tens of millions. Revenue gets shown one way externally and tracked completely differently internally, and every single adjustment I found traces back to sign-off from one office. Victor Lang. Nathan said the name already sitting heavy in his chest from Maria's warning. Elaine's eyes widened slightly. You already know about him. I'm starting to. There's a bonus structure tied to hitting specific revenue targets before each audit cycle, Elaine said. If the real numbers come in short, certain executives don't hit their bonus thresholds, so the real numbers never come in short. They get adjusted. And every few years, when the gap between real and reported gets too big to quietly patch anymore, they need something to distract from a deeper reconciliation happening at exactly the wrong time. Nathan felt the floor tilt slightly under the weight of what she was describing. They needed a distraction, he said slowly, 3 weeks before this year's audit. And they needed it to look internal, isolated, and closed fast, Elaine said. A single employee, a small number, something embarrassing enough to explain, but not big enough to actually investigate. $9, Nathan said quietly. $9, Elaine confirmed. I think they picked you because your record was clean enough that firing you would look decisive instead of suspicious, and because nobody in that building knew what you were actually worth financially or otherwise. You were supposed to disappear quietly. Nathan sat back, the pieces locking into place with a kind of clarity that made his hands go cold. He hadn't been fired because of a mistake. He'd been fired because he was on paper disposable. And the men who decided that had no idea they'd just handed their exit story to the one person in the building who could actually afford to fight back. I need proof, Nathan said. Not a theory, something that holds up. I copied what I could before they cut my access. Elaine said, sliding a small drive across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she let go of it. It's not everything, but it's enough to show the pattern if the right person looks at it the right way. Nathan closed his hand around it. Why give this to me instead of a reporter or the regulators directly? Because reporters get bored and regulators get slow, and both of them can be pressured, Elaine said. But a man who just told his own CEO he's worth $86 million in front of a room full of witnesses, nobody can quietly make you disappear. Mr. Hale, you're the loudest quiet threat this bank has ever created. Meanwhile, back inside Crestwell, Sophia had spent 2 days building her own quiet file, and what she found waiting for her that Thursday afternoon nearly stopped her heart. Buried 3 signatures deep in an authorization chain from 18 months earlier was her own name approving a quarterly adjustment. She had no memory of personally reviewing an adjustment that cross-referenced against the raw ledgers Feld had finally reluctantly handed over. Didn't match what the underlying accounts actually showed. She hadn't falsified anything. She'd trusted Lang's summary, signed where her assistant told her to sign, moved on to the next fire in a job that never stopped burning. But her signature was there. Her name. And if what she was starting to suspect was true, that signature made her look exactly as complicit as the man who'd actually built the deception, whether she'd known it or not. She called Victor Lang into her office that evening, and for the first time in 6 years, as CEO Sophia Kensington closed and locked her own door before the conversation even began. Sit down, Victor. Lang, tall, silver-templed, radiating the calm confidence of a man who had never once been questioned in that building, took his time lowering himself into the chair across from her. You look tense, Sophia. I found the entry point on the Meridian flag, Sophia said, watching his face carefully. Your service account, 6:52 in the morning, manually entered. Lang's expression didn't change, not even slightly, and that stillness frightened her more than any reaction could have. That's a shared credential. Half my department has access. Then walk me through why an outside auditor was pulled in 3 weeks early to flag a $9 item on a clean employee's record right before this year's reconciliation. Because I run risk mitigation for this bank, Lang said evenly. And sometimes risk mitigation means making difficult calls quickly without dragging every decision through 6 layers of committee. If that offends your sensibilities, Sophia, perhaps you should have asked more questions before you approved the termination yourself. The line landed exactly where he meant it to. Sophia felt her own signature rise up in her memory like a wound reopening. I'm going to find out what's actually in those adjusted quarterlies, Victor. Lang stood buttoning his jacket with unhurried precision. Be very careful what you go looking for, Sophia. You might discover your own name is already on more of it than you'd like. He left without waiting for her to respond, and Sophia sat alone in her locked office as the sun went down over the city, understanding with sudden sickening clarity that she was no longer simply investigating a scandal. She was standing directly inside one, and somebody had just made certain she knew it. 2 days after that, Greg Sanders showed up outside Nathan's house at 9 at night, standing awkwardly on the porch in the rain, without an umbrella, looking like a man who hadn't slept properly since the morning he'd fired his best analyst over $9. I know I have no right to be here, Greg said when Nathan opened the door. You're right. You don't. 5 minutes, Greg said. Please. Nathan studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. Inside, dripping onto the entryway rug, Greg couldn't quite look Nathan in the eye, the same way he hadn't been able to that morning in his office. I didn't choose to fire you because of a $9 flag, Greg said finally. I want you to know that. I got a call 2 days before telling me you'd be the one they needed to let go when the audit prep started, and telling me they'd have documentation ready whenever they needed it. Nathan felt his pulse spike. Who called you Greg? Victor Lang's office, Greg said, voice shaking. Not Lang himself, his assistant. She said it came directly from him and that it wasn't a request. Why me? Specifically me. Greg finally looked up, and the guilt in his face was raw and unmistakable. Because your file was the cleanest one in the branch. No prior complaints, no history, nothing messy enough to draw a second look once the story was written. You were the easiest name to make believable, Nathan. That's the only reason. It was never actually about you. Nathan stood in his own entryway, rain still dripping off his former manager's coat onto the floor, and felt something settle inside him that was colder and sharper than anger. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been a mistake or a rushed decision or a nervous overreaction before an audit. Somebody at the very top of Crestwell National Bank had picked his name off a list weeks in advance, specifically because he looked like nobody worth protecting. Will you say that in writing? Nathan asked quietly. Everything you just told me. Greg's hands were trembling. If I do that, I lose everything. My job. Maybe more than my job. If you don't, Nathan said, people are going to keep losing $2, $5, $9 at a time. And none of them will ever know why. Because the only people who could explain it were too afraid to say it out loud. Greg stood there a long moment, rain still dripping steadily from his coat onto Nathan's floor. And for the first time since the morning he'd read a termination letter off a script he hadn't questioned, he looked like a man finally deciding which kind of person he wanted to be. Give me a day, Greg said. I need to think. He left without waiting for a response, and Nathan closed the door behind him, standing in the quiet of his own hallway with Elaine's drive still tucked in his desk drawer upstairs. Maria's folder of complaints spread across his kitchen table, and now Greg's confession hanging unwritten in the air between them. Upstairs, Lily's door was cracked open, and when Nathan looked in, she was sitting up in bed, clearly having heard every word. That was him, she said. The manager who fired you. It was. Is he going to help? Nathan sat down on the edge of her bed. Exhaustion, and something sharper than exhaustion pulling at him all at once. I don't know yet. What if he doesn't? Nathan thought about Elaine's trembling hands sliding the drive across the table, about the block number that knew his daughter's bus route, about Sophia Kensington's face the moment the number 86 million had landed in that meeting room and changed everything. Then we find another way, he said. There's always another way, Lily. I just have to be patient enough to find it before they realize how close we already are. He turned off her lamp and stepped into the hallway. And that was the exact moment his phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. 3 words long sent from an address he didn't recognize. Check your email, now. He opened it, standing in the dark hallway, and the message waiting for him made his stomach drop straight through the floor. It was from Elaine. They know I met you. I have to go dark for a while. Everything I have is already in your hands. Use it before they bury it again. Nathan stood frozen in the hallway phone, glowing in the darkness, and for the first time since the morning he'd set his badge down on Greg's desk, he understood that this was no longer a story about a wrongful termination at all. It was a race, and somewhere in the city that night, the people who had picked his name off a list weeks in advance had just realized exactly how badly they'd underestimated the man they thought was worth nothing more than $9. The drive sat in Nathan's palm like it weighed more than it should have, and he didn't open it right away. He sat at his desk with the bedroom door cracked so he could hear if Lily stirred, and for a long moment he just stared at the small plastic rectangle Elaine had pressed into his hand 2 hours earlier, before her message telling him she was going dark. When he finally plugged it in, the folder structure loaded slow dozens of subfolders labeled in a shorthand only someone inside compliance would understand. He clicked through spreadsheets, first rows of numbers that meant nothing to him at a glance, until he found a tab labeled Vendor Cross-Reference, and inside it, a name repeated 11 times across 3 fiscal years, Halbrook Holdings. He typed it into a search bar on his laptop, hands moving faster than his thinking, and the second page of results made his stomach drop clean through the floor. Halbrook Holdings had exactly one listed director, a man named Preston Lang. Nathan sat back slowly. Same last name as Victor Lang, the CFO, whose service account had generated the flag that ended Nathan's career. He searched further, found a county filing from 6 years earlier, a marriage record buried in public documents that took him 20 more minutes to locate. Preston Lang was Victor Lang's brother-in-law. Nathan stared at the screen until the words blurred his pulse hammering in his ears. It wasn't just numbers being massaged to hit bonus targets. Money was moving somewhere real into a company controlled by a man related by marriage to the bank's own chief financial officer, and it had been happening for years, quietly, invisibly, while people $2 short on their checking accounts got fee reversals with a smile and a note that said, "Resolved, as a courtesy." He didn't sleep that night. By 5 in the morning, he had printed everything he could, hidden copies in 3 different places, and sent an encrypted backup to Marcus Pierce with a single line: "Call me the second you wake up. This is bigger than I thought." Lily came downstairs at 7 and found him already dressed, already tense, in a way she recognized instantly. "You found something," she said. "I found a lot of some things," Nathan admitted. "I need you to be extra careful today. Straight to school, straight home. No detours, okay?" "Dad, you're scaring me." "I know," he said quietly, hating that it was true. "I'm scared too. But being scared and being careful aren't the same thing. We're going to be careful." She left for the bus 20 minutes later, and Nathan watched from the window until she was completely out of sight, his hand pressed flat against the cold glass. She texted him at 8:15 4 words that made his blood run cold. "A man asked about you." He called her immediately, and she picked up on the first ring, voice tight but steady. "There was a guy outside the gate," she said. "Not a parent, not a teacher. He asked Maddie if I was Nathan Hale's daughter. She told him no because it freaked her out, and he just walked off toward a black car and drove away." "Are you safe right now? Are you inside?" "I'm in homeroom. I'm fine. Dad, this is really happening, isn't it? This isn't just some scary phone call anymore." Nathan closed his eyes, gripping the phone so hard his knuckles ached. "I'm calling the school right now, and I'm calling someone I should have called 2 days ago." He hung up and immediately dialed a security firm Marcus had mentioned in passing, a man named Derek Ruiz, who used to do protective work for corporate clients before going independent. Within the hour, Derek had a car parked outside Lily's school and another outside the house, and Nathan finally let himself exhale for the first time in what felt like days. But the relief didn't last more than a few hours, because at 11:40 that morning, Marcus Pierce called back, sounding like a man who hadn't blinked since reading the files Nathan sent him. "Nathan, I need you to tell me you have backups of everything you just sent me. Multiple backups, somewhere completely separate from your house and your laptop." "I do. Why?" "Because what you found isn't just internal fee manipulation anymore," Marcus said. "Halbrook Holdings isn't a shell for hiding bonus numbers. I ran a deeper trace this morning using resources you don't have access to. That company has been receiving wire transfers disguised as vendor payments for consulting services that, as far as I can tell, were never actually performed. We're talking tens of millions over 6 years, Nathan. This isn't creative accounting. This is embezzlement, and it's been running since before you even started working there." Nathan sat frozen at his kitchen table, the full weight of what he'd stumbled into finally landing all at once. 6 years, he repeated. "At least," Marcus said. "Which means whoever set this up has had 6 years to build protection around it. Lawyers, silence. Careers ended quietly whenever someone got too close. I think that's what happened to your compliance officer friend, Elaine Marsh, 3 months ago. And I think it's what almost happened to you, except they picked the one target in the entire building who happened to be sitting on $86 million and couldn't just be quietly erased. So what do? You do exactly what you've been doing, Marcus said. Slowly, carefully. You do not go to the press yet. You do not confront anyone directly. The second you make noise before you have everything locked down, they will bury it faster than you can imagine, and they will bury you along with it. 14 floors above the lobby where this had all started, Sophia Kensington was chasing the same thread from the other direction, and it was leading her somewhere she desperately did not want to go. She'd pulled Richard Voss's personnel file that morning, something she'd never once had reason to do in 6 years of working beside him, and buried in his pre-employment disclosures was a detail she'd somehow never noticed before. Before joining Crestwell as general counsel, Voss had spent 4 years at a boutique law firm that represented, among other clients, a private holding company called Halbrook Holdings. Her hands went cold reading it. She called him into her office that afternoon, and this time she didn't sit behind her desk. She stood by the window, arms crossed, watching him walk in with the same unhurried confidence he always carried. "Sit down, Richard. You look upset." "I pulled your file today," Sophia said. "Before Crestwell, you represented Halbrook Holdings." Something in Voss's expression shifted just barely a flicker he corrected almost instantly. "That was a long time ago, Sophia. I represented a lot of clients in private practice. I don't see the relevance." "The relevance," Sophia said, "is that Halbrook Holdings appears 11 times in vendor records tied directly to adjustments on quarterly reports I personally signed off on, and it's owned by Victor Lang's brother-in-law." The room went very quiet. "You need to be extremely careful right now," Voss said, finally his voice dropping into something low and controlled. "Not because I'm threatening you, because I'm telling you as someone who has seen exactly how this ends, that there was another person who stood exactly where you're standing 4 years ago. A compliance director. She found the same thread you're pulling on now." "What happened to her?" "She got sued," Voss said simply. "Not fired. Sued. Breach of a confidentiality clause buried on page 40 of an employment contract. Nobody reads. It bankrupted her defending herself, even though she never lost in court, because the lawsuit itself was never designed to win. It was designed to consume every dollar and every hour she had until she stopped talking. It worked." Sophia felt her throat tighten. "Are you telling me that to warn me or to threaten me?" "I'm telling you," Voss said, standing. "Because unlike Victor, I have never actually hurt anyone directly. I just made sure the paperwork was clean enough that nobody could prove intent. That's the only difference between us, Sophia, and it's not a difference I'm particularly proud of anymore." He left her office without another word, and Sophia sat down slowly in her chair, understanding now that the corruption she was standing inside of wasn't a single man's greed. It was a structure built patiently over years, with legal armor already in place, before anyone even thought to look. That evening, Greg Sanders called Nathan. And the second Nathan heard his voice, he knew something had gone wrong. "They know I came to your house," Greg said, breathless like he'd been running. "My car window was smashed this morning. Nothing stolen except the folder I kept in my glove box, the one where I'd started writing everything down." "Greg, are you safe right now?" "I don't know," Greg said, and Nathan could hear his voice shaking. "I got a call an hour ago, no name. Just a voice telling me if I put anything in writing, they'd make sure my daughter's college fund investigation got flagged for irregularities I never actually committed. They know things about my life I never told anyone at that bank, Nathan. They know everything. Greg, listen to me. You need to get somewhere safe tonight. Don't go home. I can't just disappear. I have a family." "Then take them somewhere for a few days," Nathan said, forcing his voice to stay steady, even as his own pulse hammered. "A hotel, anywhere. I'll help cover it if you need me to, but you cannot stay somewhere predictable tonight." There was a long pause on the line, and when Greg spoke again, his voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "I'm scared, Nathan. I'm actually scared." "I know," Nathan said quietly. So am I. But we're closer than they think we are, and that's exactly why they're panicking hard enough to smash a car window over a folder. People don't take risks like that unless they're desperate. After he hung up, Nathan sat alone in his kitchen for a long time, staring at the growing pile of evidence spread across his table, and for the first time since this began, doubt crept in where resolve had been standing solid. He thought about Lily's 4 words that morning. A man asked about you. He thought about Elaine going dark. He thought about Greg's shaking voice on the phone. He was starting to understand that the people on the other side of this weren't just protecting bonuses anymore. They were protecting freedom. Actual freedom. The kind you lose behind bars, if embezzlement on this scale ever reached a courtroom, and men who stood to lose their freedom did not play by the same rules as men who merely stood to lose money. His phone buzzed at nearly midnight. Unknown number again. He almost didn't answer until he saw it was a text, not a call. Meet me tomorrow. Alone. I can end this for both of us, or I can end you. Your choice, Mr. Hale. No name attached, no explanation. Just an address downtown, and a time 10 the next morning. Nathan sat staring at the message for a long time, weighing every possible outcome, before he finally called the one number he hadn't tried yet. Sophia Kensington answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious, clearly not recognizing the number. This is Sophia. It's Nathan Hale. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Nathan thought she might hang up. How did you get this number? Sophia finally asked. I still have contacts inside your building, Ms. Kensington. More than you'd think. Nathan kept his voice level, even though his heart was pounding. I think we might actually be looking for the same thing right now, and I think you know exactly what I mean by that. Another pause, shorter this time. Where are you? Somewhere safe. I'd like to keep it that way. Nathan glanced at the pile of documents on his table. I have proof, Ms. Kensington. Real proof tracing money out of your bank into a company owned by your CFO's brother-in-law. And I think you've been finding pieces of the exact same picture from the inside, which is why Richard Voss told you to stop looking. Sophia's breath caught audibly. How do you know what Richard said to me? I don't, Nathan admitted. I guessed. But I just got confirmation, so thank you. A long silence followed, heavier this time, and when Sophia spoke again, her voice had changed, completely stripped of its usual corporate polish, sounding for the first time like a genuinely frightened person, rather than a CEO. I signed things I shouldn't have signed, she said quietly. Not because I stole anything, because I trusted the wrong people to hand me summaries instead of raw numbers, and now my name is sitting 3 signatures deep in an authorization chain that makes me look exactly as guilty as the men who actually built this. I don't think you're guilty, Nathan said. I think you're the only person in that building with the authority to actually stop it, and I think that's exactly why they're going to try to destroy you the same way they tried to destroy Elaine Marsh, and the way they're currently trying to destroy me. What do you want from me, Mr. Hale? Tomorrow morning at 10, someone is asking to meet me alone downtown, Nathan said. The message said they could end this for both of us, or end me. I don't think that's a coincidence, and I don't think I should walk into that meeting without someone who can verify whatever gets said actually matches what your internal records show. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to walk into a threat with you. I'm asking you to decide once and for all which side of this you're actually standing on, Nathan said. Because from where I'm sitting, Ms. Kensington, you've been standing in the middle for 6 years without realizing it, and the middle isn't a safe place to stand anymore. The line was silent for so long, Nathan thought she might have hung up. I'll be there, Sophia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Send me the address. The next morning arrived gray and sharp, the kind of cold that got into a person's chest and stayed there. Nathan sat in his car 2 blocks from the meeting address Derek Ruiz parked discreetly a block further, watching through a pair of binoculars Nathan had insisted on, even though the security consultant thought it was overkill. Sophia arrived first, stepping out of a car without her usual entourage, alone, exactly as instructed, her face pale but composed. Nathan met her on the sidewalk. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did, Sophia said. I've spent 6 years signing whatever landed on my desk without asking hard enough questions. I'm done doing that." They walked into the building together, an empty conference space on the second floor of an office rented under a name that led nowhere when Marcus had tried tracing it the night before. The man waiting for them wasn't Victor Lang. It was Preston Lang, the brother-in-law, the name on Halbrook Holdings. "Mr. Hale," Preston said, not bothering to stand. "And Miss Kensington. I have to admit, I didn't expect you to bring backup." "I'm not backup," Sophia said, her voice steadier than Nathan expected. "I'm the CEO of the bank, whose money you've been stealing for 6 years, and I intend to make sure you answer for every single dollar." Preston smiled unbothered and slid a folder across the table toward Nathan. "Before either of you says anything else, you might regret I'd like you to look at this." Nathan opened it slowly, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Inside were photographs. Lily walking to the bus stop. Lily at her locker. A timestamp from that very morning. "You understand," Preston said quietly, "that I am not a violent man, Mr. Hale. I don't need to be. I simply need you to understand how easy it would be for someone to become one if pushed far enough." Nathan's hands were shaking, but his voice when it came was ice cold. "You just handed me evidence of witness intimidation in front of the CEO of your own bank less than 12 hours before I was already planning to hand everything I have to federal regulators." Preston's smile faltered for the first time. "You're bluffing," he said. "Am I?" Nathan said, standing Sophia rising beside him without hesitation. "Because right now, sitting in my car outside, is a security consultant recording every word of this conversation through a directional microphone, and the moment we walk out that door, this entire meeting becomes Exhibit 1 in a federal case that's about to have your name written all over it in ink you can't wash off." Preston's face went white, and for the first time since this had all begun, Nathan watched real fear cross the face of someone who had until this exact moment believed himself untouchable. "You have no idea what you've just started," Preston said, but his voice had lost every ounce of its earlier confidence. "No," Nathan said quietly, gathering the folder of photographs off the table with a hand that had finally stopped shaking. "I think you're the one who has no idea what you just started." They walked out together, Sophia and Nathan, into the cold gray morning, and neither of them said a word until they reached the sidewalk where Sophia finally turned to him, her composure cracking at last. "He had pictures of your daughter," she said, horrified. "Nathan, we need to call the police right now." "We will," Nathan said. "But not before Marcus Pierce gets everything we recorded into the hands of the SEC first, because the second local police get involved, this becomes a story the bank's lawyers can spin for weeks before charges ever stick. I want this locked down federally before Preston Lang has time to make a single phone call." His own phone buzzed as they stood there. A text from Marcus, 3 words that stopped his breath completely. "Greg is missing." Sophia's hand flew to her mouth as she read the message over Nathan's shoulder, the color draining from her face in the gray morning light. "Missing since when?" she asked. Nathan was already dialing Marcus' back phone pressed hard against his ear pulse, hammering so loud he could hear it in his own skull. "Marcus, talk to me. What do you know?" "His wife called me 20 minutes ago," Marcus said, voice tight and clipped in a way Nathan had never heard from him before. "She said Greg checked into a motel with her and the kids last night, like you told him to, then said he needed to run out for something around 11. He never came back. His phone's been off since 11:40. "That's less than 9 hours ago," Nathan said, forcing himself to think instead of panic. "Has she called the police?" "She's terrified to," Marcus said. "She thinks if she involves police before we have this locked down federally, whoever took him will just make it permanent before anyone can trace it back." Nathan's stomach turned over completely. He looked at Sophia, whose face had gone the color of chalk, both of them standing on a cold sidewalk 2 blocks from a meeting that had just shown them photographs of his 16-year-old daughter. "Where's the motel?" Nathan said. "Nathan, you can't just go running out there." "Where is it, Marcus?" Marcus gave him the cross streets, and Nathan was already moving toward his car before the call even ended, Sophia matching his pace without being asked. I'm coming with you, she said. This isn't your fight anymore. It became my fight the second I saw those photographs. Sophia snapped, cutting him off with a fierceness that surprised them both. I have signed my name onto documents that made this possible without ever asking a single hard question, Nathan. I am not going to sit in my office pretending distance makes me innocent while a man is missing because he tried to help you. Nathan looked at her for one long second, something shifting in his chest, and nodded once. Get in. They drove in silence for the first few minutes, both of them running through worst-case scenarios they didn't dare say out loud until Sophia's phone rang, an internal extension she recognized immediately. She answered on speaker without thinking. This is Sophia. Ms. Kensington? Victor Lang's voice filled the car, smooth and unhurried as always, and Nathan felt every muscle in his body go rigid at the sound of it. I heard you had an interesting morning. Sophia's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles went white. Where is Greg Sanders Victor? I have no idea what you're talking about, Lang said, and the calm in his voice was somehow more chilling than if he'd shouted. I'm calling because the board has requested an emergency session this afternoon. Apparently someone leaked concerns about irregular vendor payments to 2 board members overnight, and they're very eager to hear from you directly. Nathan's eyes cut sideways to Sophia. Someone had gotten word to the board already. Marcus may be moving faster than Nathan realized, or maybe Richard Voss finally deciding which side of the line he actually wanted to stand on. I'll be there, Sophia said evenly. I hope you will, Lang said. I'd hate for anyone to think the CEO of this bank was too preoccupied with personal matters to attend to her actual responsibilities. Give my regards to Mr. Hale if you happen to be with him. I understand he's had a difficult morning as well. The line went dead, and Sophia sat frozen, staring at the phone in her hand. He knows we're together, she said quietly. He knows exactly where we are. He's guessing. Nathan said, though his own voice didn't sound as certain as he wanted it to. Don't let him get inside your head. That's exactly what he wants. They reached the motel 12 minutes later, an anonymous strip of rooms off the highway, Greg's wife Carol standing outside room 14, with both kids pressed against her sides, her face raw from crying. He said he'd be gone 20 minutes, Carol said the moment Nathan got out of the car, her voice cracking. Just needed air, he said. Nathan, what is happening? What have you gotten him into? Carol, I am so sorry, Nathan said, and meant every word of it, guilt sitting heavy and sick in his chest. I need you to think carefully. Did he say anything at all about where he was going? A specific direction? A landmark, anything? Carol wiped her eyes, thinking hard. He said something about the old rail yard. Said he used to go there to think when he was stressed back when we were dating. I thought he just meant he needed to clear his head. Nathan felt something click into place, cold and certain. Derek, he said, turning to the security consultant who'd pulled up behind them without being asked already out of his car and scanning the parking lot with sharp, practiced eyes. Rail yard. Which one and how fast can you get eyes on it? 20 minutes out, Derek said. I've got a contact who can get there faster if I call now. Call him. While Derek worked his phone, Sophia knelt down slightly to Carol's level, her CEO composure completely gone, replaced by something rawer and more human than Nathan had seen from her yet. Whatever happens today, your family will be taken care of. I promise you that, and I don't make promises I can't keep. Carol looked at her confused. Who are you? Someone who should have asked harder questions a long time ago, Sophia said quietly. Derek's contact called back 9 minutes later, and Nathan watched Derek's face carefully as he listened, trying to read the news before it was spoken out loud. They found a car matching Greg's description, Derek said, lowering the phone slightly. Parked near the old rail yard, engine cold. No sign of him yet, but there are fresh tire tracks nearby. Heavier vehicle looks recent. Is he? Carol's voice broke completely. We don't know yet, Derek said gently, but no sign of him is better than the alternative right now. It means someone moved him, not that anything happened to him where the car is. Nathan's phone buzzed in his pocket, an unknown number again, and his blood ran cold before he'd even answered it. Mr. Hale, the same low voice from before said, unhurried, almost bored. I believe we're missing a piece for our earlier conversation. Where is Greg Sanders? Nathan said, forcing his voice level, even though his hands were shaking. Safe for now, the voice said. Whether he stays that way depends entirely on what you do in the next hour. I'd like you to delete whatever files you've been collecting, tell Ms. Kensington to resign quietly citing personal reasons, and walk away from all of this. Do that, and your friend gets to go home to his family tonight. And if I don't, then I suppose we'll find out how much a $9 mistake is really worth, won't we? The call ended, and Nathan stood frozen in the motel parking lot. Carol watching his face with desperate searching eyes, waiting for information he didn't know how to give her. They want us to stop, Nathan said quietly to Sophia. All of it, in exchange for Greg. You can't actually be considering that, Sophia said. Of course I'm not, Nathan said, though the words cost him something to say out loud, because somewhere underneath the resolve, a small, terrified part of him wondered if walking away really would be enough to keep everyone safe. But we need to move faster than they expect, because the second they realize I'm not stopping, Greg becomes a lot less useful to them alive. Marcus called back 40 minutes later while they were still parked outside the motel, waiting for Derek's contact to find something more solid than cold tire tracks. I got the files to the SEC an hour ago, Marcus said. I know a former colleague there, someone who owes me a favor and moves fast when the evidence is this clean. She's already flagging it for emergency review because of the scale, and because you have documented witness intimidation on top of the financial evidence, which changes everything about how quickly this can move. How quickly are we talking? Nathan said. If she can get a judge to sign off today, they could have people at Crestwell by tomorrow morning, Marcus said. But Nathan listened to me carefully. The moment federal agents show up, whoever's holding Greg is going to know their window just slammed shut. That could save him. It could also make things a lot more dangerous in the next 24 hours before agents actually arrive. Nathan closed his eyes, weighing lives against timelines, hating every part of the math he was being forced to do. Push for today, he said. Whatever favor you have to call in, push for today. They didn't have to wait long for the next break, though it didn't come the way any of them expected. Sophia's phone rang again, this time from Richard Voss, and she answered with visible hesitation, putting it on speaker so Nathan could hear. Sophia, I need to see you. Now. Not at the office. Richard, I don't have time for... Greg Sanders is being held at a storage facility off Route 9. Voss said, cutting her off, his voice shaking in a way Nathan had never heard from the composed lawyer. I just found out an hour ago. I'm not part of this, Sophia. I need you to believe that I only handled paperwork. I never knew it would go this far. Richard, if you know where he is, you need to tell the police right now. I can't be the one who calls it in, Voss said. If my name touches, this Lang will bury me with everything else he's threatened to bury me with for years. But I'm sending you the address right now, and after that, whatever you do with it is up to you. The address came through a moment later, and Nathan was already relaying it to Derek before Sophia had even set the phone down, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. That's 11 minutes from here, Derek said, already moving toward his car. I need to call this in properly, Nathan. Local police now, not us walking in alone. Do it, Nathan said. But I'm coming. Nathan. I'm coming, Derek. I'm not sitting in a parking lot while Greg pays for a mess I created. Derek didn't argue further, just nodded once, and within minutes they were moving 2 cars and a patrol unit Derek had managed to flag down, converging on a stretch of storage units off a road Nathan had never had reason to drive down before. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of tense radio chatter and Nathan's own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Sophia gripping the door handle beside him so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Neither of them speaking because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make the waiting worse. When they arrived, 2 patrol cars were already on scene, officers moving carefully along a row of orange rolling doors, one of them standing open at the far end. Nathan's chest seized. He was out of the car before it had fully stopped. Derek shouting at him to stay back, and for one terrible frozen second, Nathan thought he was about to see something he could never unsee. Instead, an officer emerged from the open unit, one arm braced under Greg Sanders, who was pale, disoriented hands zip-tied until moments ago, judging by the raw marks still visible on his wrists, but alive. Very clearly, shakingly alive. "Greg!" Nathan's voice broke on the name relief flooding through him so fast, his knees nearly buckled. Greg looked up, squinting against the daylight, like he hadn't seen it in hours, and when he recognized Nathan, something in his exhausted face crumpled with emotion. "You came," he said hoarsely. "Of course I came." Nathan crossed the distance and gripped Greg's shoulder, steadying him as the officer helped lower him onto the back bumper of a patrol car. "Are you hurt? What did they do to you?" "Just scared me," Greg said, voice trembling. "Told me the same thing they told you, I bet. Stop talking or things get worse." I think they were waiting to see how today played out before deciding what came next. He looked up at Nathan, eyes wet. "I didn't say anything, Nathan. Whatever else happens, I want you to know I didn't give them anything." "I know," Nathan said quietly. "I never doubted that for a second." Carol arrived 8 minutes later, having been driven over by Derek's associate, and the sound she made when she saw Greg sitting upright and breathing was something Nathan knew he would remember for the rest of his life. A sob of relief so raw, it seemed to physically knock the strength out of her legs as she ran the last few steps into his arms. Sophia stood a little apart from the reunion watching, and when Nathan finally turned to her, her eyes were wet too. "This is what they've been doing," she said quietly. "For years. Hurting people who never had $86 million to fall back on when they got scared enough to hire security and chase down storage units." "Which is exactly why it stops now," Nathan said. His phone buzzed again almost immediately, and this time it wasn't a blocked number. It was Marcus, and his voice when Nathan answered had a different energy, entirely urgent but bright, with something close to triumph. "Nathan, the judge signed off 20 minutes ago. SEC and FBI are moving on a joint warrant, and given the intimidation evidence you handed them this morning, they're not waiting until tomorrow. They're moving on Crestwell National Bank in the next 2 hours. Nathan felt something enormous loosen in his chest. Months of careful, quiet work suddenly cracking open into motion he could actually see. Today, Marcus confirmed. Sophia needs to know. If she's inside that building when agents arrive, it matters enormously how she's positioned. Cooperating from the start versus looking like she's caught off guard could be the difference between being treated as a victim of the fraud or a participant in it. Nathan relayed the message, and Sophia's face went through several rapid transformations, fear and relief, and something like grim resolve, all crossing it in quick succession before she straightened her shoulders. "I need to get back to the office," she said. "Before that board meeting Victor mentioned, if agents are arriving in 2 hours, I want to be standing in that building in front of the board, telling them everything myself before federal agents walk through the door and do it for me." "That's dangerous," Nathan said. If Lang realizes what's coming, he'll try to run, or he'll try to destroy records, or both," Sophia said. "Which is exactly why someone needs to be inside that building, keeping him occupied and unaware until agents actually arrive. I built my career on being underestimated in rooms full of men who assumed I wouldn't ask hard questions. I can use that one more time today when it actually matters." Nathan studied her for a long moment, seeing for the first time not the CEO, who had frozen in a lobby 6 days ago when she learned he was worth $86 million, but someone closer to what he suspected she might have been all along underneath the polish and the caution. "Then I'm coming with you," he said. "Nathan, you were fired from that building. Walking back in is exactly the kind of thing that will keep Victor Lang distracted and off balance," Nathan said. "He's spent this entire week assuming I'm the nuisance he can threaten into silence. Let's see how he handles the nuisance walking back through the front door on the exact day his brother-in-law's company gets raided." Sophia almost smiled, something flickering across her tired face that looked for just a moment like genuine respect. "All right, Mr. Hale, let's go remind him what we're actually worth." They drove back into the city together, The late morning light sharp and cold through the windshield, both of them quiet with the particular tension of people who know they're about to walk into something they can't fully control. Nathan's phone buzzed once more before they reached the parking garage, this time a text from Elaine Marsh, the first word he'd heard from her since she went dark 3 days earlier. "I'm safe. I heard what's happening. I'm coming in. They can't silence all of us if we walk in together." Nathan read it twice, something steadying in his chest at the sight of her name again, and looked over at Sophia as they pulled into the garage. The looming glass tower of Crestwell National Bank rising above them, unaware, yet of exactly what was about to walk through its doors. "Ready?" Sophia asked. Nathan thought of Lily's 4 words that morning, of Carol's sob of relief in a storage lot off Route 9, of Elaine's trembling hands sliding a drive across a diner table, of every quiet, ordinary person whose $2 and $5 had disappeared into an account no one was ever supposed to trace. "Ready," he said, and opened the car door. They walked through the front doors of Crestwell National Bank together, side by side, exactly 6 days after Nathan Hale had walked out of them carrying nothing but a folded coat and a signature on a termination letter he never should have had to sign. And this time, every single person in that lobby stopped exactly where they stood to watch him come back in. They stepped through the revolving doors, and the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath at once. Tellers stopped mid-transaction. A security guard near the elevator bank actually took a half step back, as if some instinct told him the ground had just shifted under the building. Word had clearly already moved faster than either of them, because by the time Nathan and Sophia reached the elevator, 3 separate employees had already pulled out their phones. "They're texting everyone upstairs," Sophia murmured. "Good," Nathan said. "Let them." The elevator doors slid shut, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, the hum of the cables, and the tightening silence of 2 people about to walk into something neither could fully predict. "If Lang realizes what's coming before the board session even starts," Sophia said quietly, "he'll bolt, or worse." "Then we don't give him time to realize anything," Nathan said. "You walk in first. You control the room. I'll be right behind you." The doors opened on the 14th floor, and the air itself seemed different up there, colder, tighter, the kind of quiet that exists right before something breaks apart completely. Victor Lang was already standing outside the boardroom arms, folded, that same unbothered composure fixed on his face like a mask he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it wasn't real. "Sophia," he said smoothly. "And Mr. Hale, what a surprise." "Save it, Victor," Sophia said, walking past him without slowing. "The board's waiting." "They're waiting for you to explain why you missed this morning's prep call," Lang said, falling into step beside her, voice still maddeningly calm. "I'd be careful how you frame things in there. Accusations without proof tend to reflect worse on the accuser." "I have proof," Sophia said, stopping dead in the hallway and turning to face him fully for the first time. 6 years of it apparently sitting 3 signatures deep under my own name, which you and your brother-in-law were more than happy to let me carry the weight of." Something flickered behind Lang's eyes. Not panic yet, but the first genuine crack Nathan had seen in him. "I don't know what you think you found," Lang said. "Halbrook Holdings," Nathan said quietly, stepping up beside Sophia. "Preston Lang. 11 vendor payments over 3 fiscal years for consulting work that was never actually performed. I think you know exactly what we found, Victor." For just a second, Lang's composure slipped completely, and underneath it, Nathan saw something raw and calculating, a man doing rapid math on how much time he had left. "You have no idea the mistake you're making," Lang said, voice dropping low. "I've heard that before," Nathan said. "From your brother-in-law, this morning, right before he showed me photographs of my daughter." Lang's jaw tightened, and for the first time he said nothing at all. They pushed through the boardroom doors together, and 11 board members looked up from their seats in various states of confusion and unease. Papers half-shuffled, coffee going cold, clearly caught between an emergency session they didn't fully understand yet, and the sight of their CEO walking in beside a man half of them recognized from a lobby confrontation 6 days earlier. "Sophia, what exactly is happening?" said an older board member near the head of the table. A woman named Patricia Ives, who Nathan had heard mentioned only in passing as the sharpest mind on the board. Victor called this session saying there were concerns about your judgment. Now you're walking in with the very employee at the center of that judgment question. Former employee, Nathan said quietly. I'd like the floor, Patricia, Sophia said, and something in her voice made the entire room go still. For the next 10 minutes before anyone else speaks, I need you to simply listen. Patricia glanced at Lang, then back at Sophia and gave one slow nod. Sophia laid it out fast and clean. No hesitation, no hedging the manually entered flag on Nathan's account. The shared service credential traced back to Lang's office the discrepancy between reported and internal ledgers going back 3 fiscal years, and Halbrook Holdings sitting at the center of all of it, owned by a man who shared Lang's last name through marriage. The room reacted in pieces, disbelief rippling outward from Patricia's end of the table toward the younger board members near the door, until one man near the middle, a broad-shouldered board member named Dale Whitfield, who Nathan didn't recognize, slammed his hand flat on the table. This is absurd, Whitfield said. You're accusing our CFO of embezzlement based on a fired analyst's grudge and some coincidental last name. It's not a coincidence, Nathan said calmly, sliding a folder across the table, the one Marcus had helped him compile the night before. It's public record, marriage license, business filings, wire transfer patterns. I'm happy to walk you through every page. Lang finally spoke, his voice regaining some of its old smoothness, though a thin edge of desperation had crept into it now. This is exactly what I warned you about, Sophia. A disgruntled former employee manufacturing a conspiracy because he was let go over a legitimate compliance flag. And you apparently decided his fantasy was worth risking the reputation of this entire institution. Let's ask him directly then, Patricia said, eyes fixed on Nathan with sharp, unreadable focus. Mr. Hale, why should this board believe you over our chief financial officer? Nathan met her gaze without flinching. Because I don't need this bank's money, Ms. Ives. I have 86 million reasons not to care whether Crestwell survives this week or not. The only reason I'm sitting in this room right now is because thousands of ordinary customers have been quietly losing $2, $5, $9 at a time for years, and nobody with the power to stop it ever bothered to ask why. The room went silent again, heavier this time. That was the moment the boardroom door opened without a knock, and Richard Voss walked in carrying a cardboard file box, his face pale but resolved in a way Nathan hadn't seen from him before. Richard, Lang said sharply, this is a closed session. Not anymore, it isn't, Voss said, setting the box down on the table with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through the entire room. I've spent 6 years making sure the paperwork around Halbrook Holdings looked clean enough that nobody could prove intent. I did that because Victor made it very clear what would happen to my career, and eventually to my family if I didn't. His voice cracked slightly. I'm done doing that. Lang's face went white. Richard, think very carefully about what you're about to say. I've thought about nothing else for 6 years, Voss said, and for the first time, Nathan saw something like relief cross his exhausted face, the particular relief of a man finally setting down a weight he'd carried far too long. Everything's in that box. Every adjusted ledger, every wire authorization, every email where Victor personally directed me to structure Halbrook's vendor agreements so they'd survive a surface-level audit. Patricia Ives stood slowly, her expression hardening into something cold and final. Victor, is any of this true? Lang looked around the room at 11 faces no longer willing to look away at Sophia, standing firm beside a man he'd tried to destroy for showing up with too much money, at Richard Voss standing straighter than he had in years, and something in him finally broke. You don't understand the pressure this board put on quarterly numbers, Lang said, voice rising, unraveling in real time. Every year, tighter targets, tighter margins, and when the real numbers didn't hit, careers ended. I was protecting this institution. You were protecting your bonus, Sophia said quietly. And you nearly destroyed an innocent man's reputation, terrorized a compliance officer out of her own career, threatened a branch manager's family, and had someone photograph a 16-year-old girl walking to school to do it. The mention of Lily seemed to land on the entire room like a physical blow, several board members visibly recoiling. That last part, Lang said quickly. That was Preston, not me. I never authorized. Save it for the people who are about to ask you these exact questions under oath, came a new voice from the doorway, and every head in the room turned at once. It was Elaine Marsh, standing in the entrance with a laptop bag over her shoulder. Hair windblown like she'd run from the parking garage, and right behind her, two men in dark jackets Nathan recognized instantly, from the particular stillness in the way they moved, the kind of controlled calm that came from doing this exact job many times before. FBI, one of them said, holding up identification as he stepped into the room, his partner already moving toward the exits with quiet, practiced efficiency. Special Agent Reyes, we have a federal warrant for financial records related to Crestwell National Bank and Halbrook Holdings effective immediately. I need everyone to remain seated and keep your hands visible. The boardroom erupted into a controlled kind of chaos. Board members half-standing chairs, scraping Lang's face, draining from white to something closer to gray as the reality of the moment finally landed. This is a mistake, Lang said, voice climbing toward panic now. I want my lawyer. I'm not answering anything without my lawyer. That's your right, Agent Reyes said calmly, already moving toward him. Victor Lang, you're being detained pending formal charges related to securities fraud, embezzlement, and witness intimidation. Preston Lang was taken into custody 11 minutes ago at his residence. Nathan felt something enormous release in his chest at those words, a tightness he'd been carrying since the moment Preston had slid those photographs across the table that morning. Preston was in custody. Lily was safe. The man who had threatened his daughter's life was no longer a threat to anyone. Lang's composure shattered completely as agents moved toward him, his eyes darting around the room, landing finally on Sophia. You'll regret this, he hissed. This bank will collapse without me managing the numbers the way I have been. The numbers you've been managing were a lie, Victor, Sophia said, standing perfectly still, her voice steady, even though her hands, Nathan noticed, were trembling slightly at her sides. This bank doesn't need lies to survive. It needs honesty, something you clearly forgot how to offer a long time ago. Agents led Lang out of the boardroom in silence, and the moment the door closed behind him, the entire room seemed to exhale at once. 11 board members sitting in stunned, shaken silence, staring at the box of evidence Voss had set on the table and at the empty chair where their CFO had sat only minutes before. Patricia Ives was the first to speak, her voice quieter now, almost gentle. Sophia, what happens now? Now, Sophia said, we cooperate fully with federal investigators. We begin an independent audit of every customer account going back 6 years, and we make sure every single person who lost money to Halbrook Holdings directly or through those fee manipulations gets every dollar back with interest. She paused, looking around the table. And I offer my resignation, effective the moment this board decides I'm no longer the right person to lead that process. Gasps rippled around the table, but Nathan wasn't watching the board anymore. He was watching Sophia's face, the particular exhaustion and clarity of someone who had just for the first time in 6 years told the complete truth without flinching. Absolutely not, Patricia said firmly, surprising everyone, including Sophia herself. You walked into this room and exposed your own CFO at real personal risk, Sophia. That is not the behavior of someone who needs to resign. That's the behavior of exactly the person this bank needs leading it through what comes next. Sophia's eyes went wet, and for a moment she said nothing at all, just nodded once tightly, the kind of nod that holds back more emotion than words ever could. Nathan felt Elaine's hand on his shoulder, and turned to find her smiling at him, exhausted, but genuinely fully present for the first time since the diner 3 days earlier. You did it, she said quietly. We did it, Nathan corrected. You, Greg, Maria, Richard, Sophia. I just happened to be the one loud enough to make them notice. You were more than loud enough, Elaine said. You were the one person in this whole story they couldn't quietly erase. That's what made all the difference. Outside the boardroom windows, Nathan could see agents moving through the 14th floor with quiet efficiency, sealing off Lang's office, carrying out boxes of files, and somewhere below, he knew similar scenes were playing out at Preston Lang's residence and at the offices of Halbrook Holdings. The entire structure Victor had spent 6 years building, finally collapsing in a single coordinated morning. His phone buzzed. A text from Carol, 3 words that made his throat tighten with relief all over again. "Greg is home," he typed back quickly. "Tell him I owe him more than I can ever repay." Her response came almost instantly. "He says you don't owe him anything. He says you gave him a reason to stop being afraid of doing the right thing. That's payment enough." Nathan lowered the phone, blinking back something he didn't fully expect, and found Sophia watching him from across the room, her own eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Walk with me," she said quietly. They stepped out onto a private balcony off the executive floor. The city spread out cold and bright below them, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. "I owe you an apology," Sophia said finally. "Not the kind you give because it's expected, a real one." "I'm listening," Nathan said. "I looked at your file that morning," Sophia said, voice tight with something like shame. 11 years of clean record, and I approved your termination over the phone in less time than it takes to order coffee, because a clean, fast story mattered more to me in that moment than actually finding out what was true. I judged you by your coat and your car and your job title, and I was wrong about every single part of it." "You weren't wrong about my coat," Nathan said. "It really is old." A surprised, watery laugh escaped her, the first real laugh he'd heard from her in 6 days. "I'm serious, Nathan." "I know," he said, gentler now. "And I appreciate you saying it. But I didn't come back into that building today for an apology, Sophia. I came back because thousands of people who bank here don't have $86 million to fall back on when someone decides to lie about them. They needed someone to actually look." Sophia nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "The refunds. The full audit. I meant every word of that in there." "I believe you," Nathan said. "And for what it's worth, I never wanted to destroy this bank, Sophia. I wanted the truth. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always look like one from the outside." "There's a very big difference," Sophia said quietly. "I think it's the only reason any of this ended somewhere survivable, instead of somewhere much worse." That evening, Nathan drove home slower than usual, windows cracked despite the cold, letting the noise of the city wash over him after a week that had felt at times like it might never end. He found Lily sitting on the porch steps when he pulled into the driveway, arms wrapped around her knees, clearly waiting for him. She was on her feet before he'd even fully parked running down the steps, and he barely had time to open the car door before she collided into him, arms wrapping tight around his chest. "Marcus called Mom's old number and left a message saying it was over," she said into his shoulder voice, muffled and shaking. "I didn't believe it until I saw your car. It's over," Nathan said, holding her tightly, feeling for the first time in days like he could actually breathe all the way down. "Preston Lang is in custody. Victor Lang is in custody. Nobody is going to hurt you, Lily. I promise you that." She pulled back just enough to look at his face, checking the way she always did for any sign he was softening the truth to protect her. She didn't find one. "You really did it," she said quietly. "You actually found the truth." "We did," Nathan said. "You more than anyone. Every time I wanted to stop being careful and just fight, you were the one who reminded me why patience mattered." They sat together on the porch steps as the evening settled in cold and clear around them, and Lily rested her head against his shoulder, the way she used to when she was much younger, back before the world had ever asked either of them to be brave in ways neither of them had chosen. "So what happens to all that money now?" Lily asked eventually. "The 86 million. Are you still moving it out of the bank?" Nathan thought about that for a long moment, about Sophia's raw, unguarded apology on the balcony, about Patricia Ives refusing to accept her resignation, about the promise of a full audit and full refunds for every customer who'd ever lost $2 they couldn't afford to lose. "No," he said finally. "I think I'm going to leave it exactly where it is. Not because I forgive what happened, but because walking away now would mean walking away from making sure they actually keep every promise they made today. Somebody has to stay and watch." 3 weeks later, Crestwell National Bank issued a public statement confirming full cooperation with federal investigators, the beginning of an independent audit stretching back 6 years, and a customer restitution program that would eventually return every improperly charged fee with interest to over 40,000 affected accounts. Sophia Kensington remained CEO, now flanked by an entirely restructured compliance department, with Elaine Marsh reinstated and promoted sitting at its head. Greg Sanders returned to Crestwell as well, not as a branch manager anymore, but as the person leading employee protections for whistleblowers, a position that hadn't existed before that year and existed now because of exactly what he'd survived. Victor Lang and Preston Lang were both indicted on federal charges. Within the month, the evidence against them so thoroughly documented that even their own attorneys reportedly advised early plea discussions rather than risk a trial. Richard Voss, in exchange for his full cooperation and testimony, avoided prosecution himself, though he resigned from Crestwell, entirely choosing, as he told Sophia in his final week, to spend whatever career he had left, doing work he could actually be proud of. Nathan never gave a single interview about the $86 million. He didn't need to. The story moved on its own through the people who'd lived it, through Carol's quiet gratitude, through Maria's insistence to anyone who'd listen that she'd always known Nathan Hale was more than he ever let on, through Lily, who told the story exactly once to a college admissions essay prompt, asking her to describe a time she'd watched someone stand up for what was right and never needed to tell it again because everyone who mattered already knew. On a quiet evening months later, Nathan sat at the same kitchen table where this had all truly begun. Legal pad, long since replaced by ordinary bills and a half-finished crossword. Lily doing homework across from him, without a single wrong answer, circled in pencil this time, because she hadn't needed the help in weeks. He thought sometimes about the version of that morning where he'd simply signed the termination paper, taken his coat, and gone quietly home without ever mentioning the trust at all. It would have been easier. Nobody would have blamed him for choosing easier. But somewhere in that choice, thousands of people would have kept losing $2, $5, $9 at a time, invisible and unheard, exactly the way the people who built that system had counted on. Nathan Hale had never wanted to be seen as a man worth $86 million. He had wanted simply to be seen as a man whose word meant something, whose 11 years of quiet work meant something, whose daughter's belief in him meant something. And in the end, it was that same quiet, ordinary integrity, not the size of his fortune, that had actually brought the truth into the light. A person's worth was never something anyone else got to decide for them. Not a bank, not a number on a screen, not a room full of people too afraid to ask a single real question. It was decided always in the moment someone chose to tell the truth, when it would have been so much easier to stay silent. And Nathan Hale had made that choice fully, completely, and without regret the very first time they told him he was worth only $9.